All right, now that we've got a basic profile page working and we've taken a moment to look at this powerful debugging technique, we're ready to start adding something that looks more like this mockup I showed you, where we've got an image representing the user and then the name of the user. So let's go to the show page. What we're going to do here is let's provide a title. Remember, the provide method defines the title that's automatically displayed on the page. So let's look at, say, what was it? Maybe the about page. So provide title and then a string, which is the name of the page. But in this case, we'd actually just like to use the name of the user. That's a nice thing to use in the title. So let's do this here. Just do @user.name. And then let's put in a header 1 tag, an h1 tag. And we want to get this image here. So let's make a helper for that. Actually, I want to defer that just a moment, but I do want to put the user's name in here. So let's just start with this. The syntax highlighting is telling me there's something wrong. What is wrong here? Actually, you can't tell what's wrong offhand. Huh, looks like it's working. That's weird. Huh, the highlighting was leading us astray. Interesting. All right, so this is a better start. Now we've got an h1, and we can also see here in the tab, it's got the name of the user, which is in this case my name. And then remember, we also have the base title, Ruby on Rails tutorial sample app. Now, if you've got much experience with web development, or even if you know the kinds of things that can go wrong, at this point you might be concerned that we're just sticking this user's name into the title and into the regular template, just into this h1. But the user's name is something that they submit, right? That's something that we're going to actually let users create through the web. And this is a potentially serious security hole. You can do something like put some JavaScript in the name field, say, and use it to launch an attack. That would be a cross-site scripting attack. So what ends up happening in Rails is that any information that's inserted into the template is escaped out. So for example, if I were to, say, put in a JavaScript, this is simulating what would happen if someone put in a script, and then some JavaScript and so on. So suppose that instead of the name Michael Hartle, I'd use Michael Hartle plus a script and then some dangerous stuff in here. So we can take a look at what this does. So this actually just inserts it literally. So if we inspect this, that's kind of weird actually. That's not what I expected it to look like at all. I expected it to look escaped out. Yeah, here we go. That's kind of weird actually. The inspector, that's really a strange behavior. So the inspector is actually showing it as script, dangerous stuff, and then closing script. But if I actually show the source, you can see what it is. It's this. It's &LT semicolon. This is the HTML code for this less than sign. So what it's doing here in Rails is it's escaping out this dangerous content by converting this thing to its HTML character code. What that means is that if someone tries to insert something dangerous, or even just something simple like putting something in bold, which would be kind of weird, that's weird stuff. In this case, it's also just going to be escaped out. So you can see here, instead of actually putting it in boldface, it's escaped it out. So in contrast, you could do this to show you. This is what it looks like when it's not escaped out. Right. So you can see it's, instead of an actual bolded couple of words, we have this escaped out version. All right, so we've got the name part from this mockup here, like this. So let's get that gravatar, this avatar image as well. So the word avatar has been used for quite a while now in computing, especially in the context of web applications, to refer to this sort of image that represents the user. It doesn't have to be a photograph, it can be an icon or something like that. And there's a service called Gravatar, which stands for Globally Recognized Avatar. It's really useful for this purpose. Among other things, it lets us defer the difficulty of uploading and formatting images. And we can pass that off to the Gravatar service. So what we're going to do here is we're going to define a helper called Gravatar for, and then the name of the user. And of course, this doesn't exist yet, so it's going to cause an error if we refresh it. Right. So the place to put this gravatar helper, it depends on how we're going to use it. In this case, gravatars will be used principally with respect to users. So what we're going to do is put it in the helper file for users. It's sort of the logical place to put it. So it's just a regular Ruby method. And so our method will return the gravatar for the given user. So the gravatar will just be an image. And let's define it. This is our first example of a helper that we defined ourselves. Actually, that's not true. It's the second one. Remember, we did this before. We did application helper. So we've got a full title helper. This is now the gravatar for helper, and it's going to take in a user. And let's take a look at this. So the way that gravatars work is that there's a URL that then has an ID associated with the gravatar. So this will seem a little bit like magic initially, but this is just the kind of thing that you can learn by reading the gravatar documentation. So the way that it works is that gravatar uses what's called an MD5 hash. It's a particular cryptographic hash of the email address. So let's take a look at that. So it turns out that the MD5 hashing algorithm is actually loaded by Rails, so it's available on the console, and you can access it like this. MD5 hex digest. This is the kind of thing, again, you could just Google around or read the APIs. This is the sort of thing that I don't even remember how I learned about this thing, but it certainly is not something I would have guessed. So we can do this. So this hash is part of the URL that gravatar uses. So let me show you the form of that. The gravatar URL looks like this. It's HTTPS. So this S is for secure. It's a secure URL. Just to emphasize it, I guess, they call it secure.gravatar.com/avatar/ and then the ID. So it would be something like this. Just put this in here. Oops, I need to copy this. And then what we want to do is render back an image tag of that gravatar URL. And then let's give it an alt. Remember, we did this on the, what was it? It was the home page. We have this image tag helper. So it takes in the name of the image and then some alternative and then the URL. So in this case, the alt, let's just use the user's name. And we actually don't need the, oh, I'm sorry, this is for the link to. Never mind. The image tag just has the name and then some key value pairs here. So this is alt user.name, and then let's give it a class so we can style it. Oops, and this should be in quotes. Let's give it a gravatar class, a CSS class. By the way, you might notice the syntax highlighting. This is because in Ruby, the word class is a keyword, but in this case, this does not refer to a Ruby class. This refers to a CSS class, but the editor doesn't know that. So let's save that and take a look at what we've got. Cool. So this is the gravatar image here. This is the default gravatar image. And the reason it's the default is because there is no gravatar associated with this email address. In fact, it's impossible, at least for normal people, to get an email address at example.com. It's kind of cool, actually. Example.com, in fact, is reserved for exactly this kind of example. Right? So example.com is the right thing to use. It's actually part of the standard for the web, but that means you can't have an email address there. So let's do this. Let's just build this up here. So this is the gravatar ID. So this is, again, just hard-coded. Oops, it should be this here. Let's interpolate it. So we're just building this up piece by piece. So this should still work. Right. So now what we actually want to do, though, is calculate the hex digest of the user's email address. So let's do that right in here. And let's change the user's email address to something that actually makes sense. It's a real email address. And I'm going to change the name at the same time. So let's just do this. Actually, do we have a user? I don't think we do. No. Okay. So let's update the attributes. So I'm going to use an address that I control, example@railstutorial.org, and I've associated this email address with a gravatar at the gravatar website. And remember, we need this to be valid. We could actually do this with update attribute twice, and we wouldn't have to put in the password. But in this case, we're using update attribute, so we need the password and the confirmation. This is because of the validation on the password supplied by has secure password. Right? This implicit in has secure password is some validations on the password and confirmation. We can bypass those by using update attribute, but in this case, update attributes, plural, requires them. So, all right, so now let's take a look at that. Look again at our helper. So what this is doing is it's just accessing user.email. It's calling this MD5 hex digest method, and then it's interpolating that ID into this URL, and it's putting the image on the page, and this should work. There we go. So this is the image that I've associated with that email address. Now there's one other thing I want to do. I want to show you. If I upcase this email address, it'll actually break. And the reason for that is that the MD5 hash is case sensitive. So this here is a different hash from this. By the way, you might notice I'm using the word hash here. It's tangentially related to the idea of the kind of key value hashes that we have in Ruby, because these are actually pretty good for uses as the keys sometimes. In some contexts, you'll have a hash table. But they're not the same thing. Unfortunately, this is standard terminology just to mix Ruby hashes with hash digest and so on. If you want, you can call it a digest to be clearer. But in any case, this thing is case sensitive. Now, in our case, we've got this user model where we're actually downcasing the email addresses we've standardized. And that was in order to have uniqueness of email addresses at the database level. But we shouldn't rely on that, because you never know, in what context we might use this gravatar for helper. So it's probably a good idea to standardize on downcase here too. This will never actually make a difference, but this just makes the helper a lot more robust. It means that it will never fail due to this case sensitivity issue. So now it's back again. And at this point, we're pretty close to that mockup. You can see here, we want things kind of moved to the left and maybe styled a little differently. So as a last step, we're going to add some extra HTML structure and some CSS. Let's do that. Go to this here, and where is it? It's in show. So I'm going to put in some extra tags here. It's a div tag, and then I'm going to have an aside tag. This is using a tag for this kind of sidebar. So what the user profile page will have this sidebar information. You can see here, it's going to be, it'll end up being this kind of thing, this sort of sidebar. So that's why we're using the side. And actually, let's give this a class. This is a bootstrap class. And I'm going to give it a section. The class user info. We'll style that ourselves. And then inside here, I'm going to put the h1. Let's do this. Save that and see what it did. Probably didn't do very much. No, it actually did more than I expected. But you can see the styling is all messed up, so let's put in some CSS to fix that. The exact form of the CSS isn't important for the purposes of this tutorial, so what I'm going to do is just paste it in from the book. So let's go here. Here we go. Let's just copy this here. Put it in here. Just take a look at the structure. You can see we've got some nesting here. This is SCSS and not just CSS. So we've got styling for the aside. Actually, let's just split this. We've got styling for the aside here. We've got styling for the section. There's some padding. This ampersand, remember, refers to the parent, which is just section in this case, the parent tag. The first child, this means that the first section will have some special styling. And then this span is actually an anticipation of some future things we'll be doing. And then we've got some gravatar classes here, and this is for the actual gravatar, and again, this is anticipating some future styling later in this tutorial. Let's save that and take a look at it. All right, there's still something wrong. You can see that this footer here is kind of in the middle of the profile, and I think I know why. I think it's because this div needs another class on it, or it needs a class. So we're going to give another class in this section. It's going to be class equal to row. Let's take a look at that. There we go. So now this is a pretty good real-life version of this mock-up that we saw. So we've got the avatar and then the name.